Look around you right now. If something goes wrong tonight, a break-in, a crash, a fight spilling out into the street, you already know exactly what to do. You reach for a phone, you press three little numbers, and within minutes, a stranger in a uniform comes to help you. We treat this as normal. We treat it as permanent. We treat it as something that has simply always been there, like the sky. But it hasn't. For almost the entire story of our species, there was no one to call. No patrol car, no badge, no blue light sweeping across the dark. If you were robbed, no officer came. If someone hurt the people you loved, no detective opened a case with your name on it. The idea of a paid force whose whole job is to protect strangers and enforce the law is shockingly new. Younger than the piano, younger than the printed newspaper, younger than your country almost certainly is. So here is a simple and slightly unsettling question. For thousands of years, when there were no police at all, how on earth did anybody stay safe? To understand the answer, you have to unlearn a habit of thought. Today, when someone wrongs you, you hand the problem to the state. A crime is treated as an offense against everyone, against society itself, and society sends its officers to deal with it. But for most of human history, a crime was a private matter. It was between you and the person who hurt you. There was no neutral third party standing in the middle. If your goat was stolen, getting it back was your problem. If your brother was killed, justice was not something you requested. Justice was something you took. This is the world of the blood feud, and it ruled human life for a very long time. If a man from one family killed a man from another, the dead man's relatives were expected almost obligated to strike back. An eye for an eye was not a poetic saying. It was the actual system, the only break on violence anyone had. The problem is obvious. One killing led to a revenge killing, which led to another, and families could bleed each other for generations over a single ancient insult. To soften this, many early societies invented a clever fix. Instead of blood, you could pay. In the Germanic tribes of Europe, it was called the weregild, the man price. Every person had a set value. Kill a free farmer and you owed his family so many head of cattle or so many pieces of silver. Kill a nobleman and the price soared. It sounds cold, but it was a genuine step forward, a way to stop a murder from becoming a war. The first real governments tried to write these rules down. Nearly 4,000 years ago in Babylon, King Hammurabi carved his famous laws into a tall pillar of black stone, steel, and the punishment was fixed. Break a bone, and a matching bone of yours could be broken in return. It was harsh, but it was public, and that mattered. Everyone could see the rule, and everyone knew the cost. Yet even with the law carved in stone, notice what was still missing. There were courts, there were judges and punishments. But there was no one whose job was to patrol the streets, to investigate, to catch the criminal in the first place. Finding the guilty person and dragging them in front of the judge was left to the victim. And here another puzzle appears. Without detectives, without fingerprints, without any way to gather evidence, how did they decide who was actually guilty? Often, they asked God. Across medieval Europe, an accused person might face trial by ordeal. He would be forced to carry a bar of red-hot iron, a set number of paces, or plunge his arm into a pot of boiling water to pull out a stone. His wound was then bound up, and after 3 days, the bandage came off. If the burn was healing cleanly, God had declared him innocent. If it festered, he was guilty. In another version, a suspect was bound and lowered into a pond. Because pure water was believed to reject a liar, if you sank, you were innocent. And if you floated, you were condemned. Elsewhere, a man could clear his name by swearing his innocence, while a group of neighbors, called oath helpers, swore alongside him that they believed him. Your reputation and your friends, quite literally, were your defense. So communities leaned on each other, because there was nobody else. In medieval England, this became a hard rule of daily life. If you saw a crime, or if a crime was done to you were expected to raise the hue and cry. You would shout as loudly as you could, "Stop, thief!" And by law, every single person who heard you had to drop what they were doing and join the chase. Men, women, shopkeepers, farmers, all of them pouring out of their doors to run the criminal down. If you heard the cry and ignored it, you yourself could be punished. In a village of a few hundred souls where everyone knew everyone, this worked surprisingly well. The whole community was, in a sense, the police force. There simply was no line between an officer and an ordinary person. To make this even tighter, the English organized people into groups. Every man was placed into a little band of about 10 households, called a tithing, and every tithing was bound together under one heavy promise. If any member of your group committed a crime, the rest of you were responsible for bringing him to court. If you failed, the whole group paid the fine. Imagine that for a moment. Your neighbor's behavior was your legal problem. This system, later known as Frank Pledge, turned the entire population into each other's keepers. People watched people, not out of nosiness, but because the law made your neighbor's crime cost you money. Above all these local groups sat one royal official, and his title still lives in our language today. He was the Shire Reeve, the king's man in charge of the shire, the county. Say those two words quickly enough, Shire Reeve, and you can hear the word we still use: sheriff. He collected taxes, he ran the local court, and he could summon every able-bodied man in the county into a posse to hunt down a fugitive. Centuries later, in 1285, an English king named Edward I tied all of these threads into a single famous law, the Statute of Winchester. It ordered every town to keep a watch at its gates through the night. It commanded every man to keep weapons in his home, ready to answer the hue and cry, and it made the whole community answerable if a criminal escaped. For the next 500 years, this was the backbone of English law and order: no police, just duty, spread across every pair of hands in the land. When the sun went down, the danger rose, and a new figure appeared in the streets: the Watchmen. Towns kept a night watch, ordinary citizens taking unpaid turns to walk the dark lanes carrying a lantern, a long staff, and sometimes a bell. Their job was to look out for fire, for strangers, for thieves, and to shout the alarm if trouble came. This was the watch and ward. Above them stood the constable, often the most respected man in the parish, who was also unpaid and served his turn because it was his duty, not his career. These were not trained professionals. The watchman might be a baker who had worked all day and now shuffled through freezing streets half asleep, more likely to fall over a wall than to catch a burglar. People even mocked them in plays as bumbling and useless. But for hundreds of years, this thin, tired, volunteer line was all that stood between a town and the night. Not every place did it this way. Ancient Rome, that enormous crowded city of 1 million people, needed something stronger. So, the Emperor Augustus created the vigiles, thousands of men who patrolled the streets after dark, fought the fires that constantly threatened the wooden city, and grabbed burglars and runaway slaves. Alongside them were tougher units, the urban cohorts, soldiers meant to crush riots. It was closer to policing than almost anything else in the ancient world. Yet even Rome's watchmen were really firefighters and soldiers first. When the empire fell, that fragile machinery fell with it, and Europe slid back to the watchmen and the hue and cry for another 1,000 years. And England was far from alone in leaning on neighbors instead of officers. On the other side of the world, Imperial China ran a vast system called the Baojia, in which households were bundled into groups of 10, then 100, then 1,000. Each group had a headman who kept a register of everyone living there and was held answerable for their conduct. If one family harbored a criminal, the neighboring families were expected to know, to report, and to share the blame if they stayed silent. Different language, different empire, same ancient idea: make the community watch itself. Because no one has invented anyone else to do the watching. As towns swelled into cities, the old village trust began to break. In a place where nobody knows their neighbor, shouting "Stop, thief!" into a crowd of strangers accomplishes very little. Crime grew faster than the sleepy watch could handle, and into that gap crept a strange and shady profession: the thief-taker. A thief-taker was a private bounty hunter. If your property was stolen, you would offer a reward, and this man would go into the criminal underworld and get it back, for a price. The trouble is that the best person to recover stolen goods was often the same sort of person who stole them. The most famous of them all, a Londoner named Jonathan Wild, played both sides with breathtaking nerve. To the public, he was the great thief-taker general, the hero who caught robbers. In secret, he ran the very gang doing the robbing, then collected the rewards for returning what his own men had taken, and sent his rivals to the gallows. He was eventually exposed and hanged before a roaring crowd, and he became a symbol of just how rotten a system without real police could get. Something had to change, and the first crack of the new world came from a blind magistrate. In the middle of the 1700s, a London judge named Henry Fielding, yes, the novelist, gathered a small group of reliable men attached to his office on Bow Street. They would actually go out, investigate robberies, and pursue suspects across the city. People called them the Bow Street Runners. There were never many of them, but they were paid, they were organized, and they represented a brand new idea: that catching criminals could be a real, permanent job done by trained men, not a chore forced on tired volunteers. Then came the man who changed everything. His name was Sir Robert Peel, and in 1829, he pushed a law through the British Parliament, creating the Metropolitan Police of London, the first large professional, full-time police force of the modern kind. About 1,000 uniformed men began walking regular beats across the city, paid a steady wage, wearing blue coats deliberately chosen to look nothing like a soldier's red. carrying only a wooden truncheon. Peel wanted them to be seen as citizens in uniform, protectors rather than an occupying army. The public was suspicious at first and called them all sorts of names, but two of those nicknames stuck out of Peel's own first name, Peelers, and the one still used today, Bobbies. Robert, Bobbies! The idea spread across the world with astonishing speed. Within a few short decades, city after city copied the London model, and the uniformed officer walking a beat became one of the most familiar figures on Earth. In the space of a single lifetime, humanity went from having no police at all to treating them as a permanent fixture of every town. So the next time you see a patrol car drift past, or you tap those 3 numbers into your phone knowing that help will come, remember how strange and how recent that certainty really is. For almost all of human history, safety was not a service you called for. It was a chase you joined, a debt you collected, a watch you kept yourself in the freezing dark. The stranger in the uniform is one of the youngest ideas we have, and for thousands of years before him, the only thing standing between people and chaos was simply other people.